Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to The 3-Month Vacation. In the early 1900s, French architect Eugene Hénard introduced one-way circular traffic flow at the Place de l'Étoile in Paris. Yes, this is the chaotic swirl of cars around the Arc de Triomphe that still gives tourists heart palpitations. It seemed like a great idea, so Britain adopted it, and by the 1950s, roundabouts were everywhere, except they kept locking up. Traffic would pile in from all sides, nobody had priority, and the whole thing would gridlock. Confidence in the design collapsed. Many of these roundabouts were ripped out, and they were replaced with traffic lights. The core flaw? So what was the main problem? Entering vehicles had priority over those already in the circle. It sounds logical, you're arriving, make way, but in practice, it meant that the roundabout filled up, and nobody could move. It took another 66 years for Britain to fix it, with what sounds like a very tiny change. The entering traffic must yield to circulating traffic. Suddenly, capacity jumped up 10%, crashes and delays dropped by 40%, and the modern roundabout was born. France adopted the same rule in 1983, and today has more than 30,000 roundabouts, roughly double the per capita count of the UK. The roundabout didn't fail because the concept was wrong. It failed because the system needed some tweaking. For anyone who trains, teaches, or runs courses, tweaks like these are the dream, especially if you want to keep your clients working once you've left the room. How do you get people to work independently? Most importantly, how can you trust that the system will hold itself together? At Psychotactics, we stumbled into a set of odd principles that worked better than anything we'd done before. We spent years trying to fix this issue. Paid continuation programs, extensive syllabuses, accountability structures, follow-up calls. We did the due diligence, and almost every time things would fall apart within weeks, never to recover. It was easy to reach the obvious conclusion. Self-management without a leader doesn't work. People need someone directing traffic. Then, in 2025, we ran a follow-up to the article writing course. The course ended in August 2025, but in April 2026, a decent number of the clients were still together, still writing. Not because we had cracked the code, but rather because of 3 small but monumental tweaks. So what are the 3 elements that changed everything? Number 1, start with a countdown. Number 2, break the work into tiny collated pieces. And number 3, build in a rest gap between the main course and the follow-up. Let's start out with the first one, which is start with a countdown. Let's begin with the first concept, which is start with a countdown. This sounds almost too simple to matter, but it's a psychological lever that changes everything. A countdown creates a container. Instead of an open-ended keep writing, participants know that there are 10, 9, 8, 7. Yeah, you get it. But they know that they're working backwards, that the clock is ticking, and it creates an urgency without pressure. I don't know why it works, but it seems to work. It seems to roll back and you're headed towards some kind of ending point where you just take off. Maybe it's the takeoff. Maybe that's what it is. Try counting from 1 to 10, for example, and try counting backwards from 10 to 1, and you'll find that the countdown has all of that rocket ship burst and energy in it rather than just going forwards. I know, it's bizarre, but that's the first thing that we changed. This takes us to the second bit, which is to break the work into tiny collated pieces. Now, this is no surprise. We've been going on about tiny increments, tiny increments, tiny increments for years and decades on end. But we didn't implement it. When people finished a course, like the article writing course, we expected them to be at a certain level. If you start off with tiny little bits and you build up, eventually, you should be able to write the whole article. So the expectation was write the whole article. And that is exhausting. Because article writing has many moving parts. Outlining, storytelling, connecting the story to a point, handling objections, writing the summary. All of this takes work. And for the first time in 2025, we didn't ask people to do all of the work. We gave them one component per week so that by week 5, all of the pieces came together in a finished article. And it felt natural. It didn't feel overwhelming. Once they got all the bits and pieces, all the elements together, they could write about 3 to 5 articles in 5 weeks, which is quite amazing. It works out to roughly an article a week. It's not bad at all. In fact, it's quite astounding. We also reduced the number of active days. On a course, you have to show up 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. It's pretty intense. And once you finish the course, fewer days means that it was easier to show up on the days that counted. What you've just heard are 2 simple tweaks. First, start with the countdown. Second, break the work into tiny collated pieces. But this takes us to the third part, which is to build in a rest gap between the main course and the follow-up. This third point is quite counterintuitive. The instinct is to go straight from the course to follow up while the momentum is high. But going from a main course to more main courses leaves people feeling stuffed. A genuine break, yes, even though it feels risky, even though people might drift, is what makes re-entry possible. Rest isn't lost momentum, it's recovery, and then you can have the next push. When you consider why habits fail, it's because they expect too much from a person. We think of habit as consistency, showing up every day, no exceptions. But the actual core of habit is simpler. Just show up. And there are those that want to do 100 push-ups every day. Well, it's great for them. Suppose someone wants to write the full article with every detail polished. That's wonderful. But the instruction has to be the minimum is 5 push-ups. The minimum is 15 minutes of drawing. That's what you're committing to. Everything above that is a bonus. That minimum threshold, that's what makes the system self-managing. It's low enough that almost everyone can hit it. And once people are in the habit of showing up even at the minimum, the system runs itself. The article writing group continued and is continuing at this moment, but they've gone for 6 months after the course ended. There's been no oversight. No one is directing traffic. They just keep writing. We're now implementing it for the drawing course, the cartooning course, and we'll see how this goes for all the other courses. I'll keep you updated. But something like this has never happened before in the last 20 years. The Roundabout was an amazing invention, still is. We use it in New Zealand all the time. But it almost didn't work. It took a lot of tweaking and almost 66 years before it started doing what it was originally supposed to do. So maybe you'll have to do a little tweaking yourself, but I hope these 3 points help. Well, it's time to do a summary. So what were the 3 points that we covered? The first is start with a countdown. Start with week 16, if that's what you're planning to do, and then work your way back to week 1. The second point is break the work into tiny collated pieces. I still didn't learn this lesson. The cartooning course is just finished, and I was going to give them some follow-up work. And I was giving them entire scenes. Now, this is very hard to do, even for me, which is why I drop the ball so many times when I'm doing my watercolors. So instead of breaking the work into tiny collated pieces, like, okay, today just do the outline, tomorrow just do the outline, day after just do the outline, and we go forward that way. And then the next week you build upon that, because that builds momentum. That's tiny little work. And finally, and once again, I had to be reminded, is you have to have a rest gap between the main course and the follow-up. People have had their fill. They don't want to eat anymore. They need a little break before the next meal. And then the next meal after dinner, it can't be dinner. It has to be breakfast. So it has to be much smaller. Even now, I've had to learn these lessons and then implement them across every bit of learning. When people say, I'm not talented, it's because the teacher is not talented. And it takes all of these tiny tweaks, hundreds, possibly thousands of them, before the teacher can teach better, and therefore you become talented. So find a talented teacher and one that is constantly making tweaks, and you will surprise yourself, your family, and your friends. That's it from me. Let's find out what's happening in psychotactics land. One of the things that you can do, if you haven't already, is get yourself a copy of Suddenly Talented. It explains the concepts of why we struggle so much with learning. It's not because you have certain skills. If you go back 500 years, the conversation would have been different. People would be saying, oh, you're so skilled at sword fighting. You're so skilled at embroidery. You're so skilled at... You get the point, right? We are a product of our environment. You don't get a bolt of lightning that causes you to be good at coding or podcasts or anything that didn't exist 500 years ago. So everything has to be learned, and you have to find a good teacher. Find that teacher, and once you find that teacher, trust that teacher. In the meantime, read Suddenly Talented, and if you already have a copy, well, read it again or listen to it, because it's an audio as well from our website. The other mini book that you can read is Wonky Logic. You can go to psychotactics/products/Wonky Logic. And in this tiny book, you get 12 questions. On the sales page, the questions are already listed. So why would you buy the book? Well, buy the book, read the questions, and the answers enable you to think of what you would do in that situation. So yes, questions matter, but the answers, you need to read them as well. So that's Wonky Logic and Suddenly Talented. If you haven't been reading for a while, this is a good time. That brings us to the end of this podcast. I'll say bye for now, and we'll see you in 5000bc.com. Bye-bye.